When the house held its breath. I used to believe that a home has its own blue pulse, that if you put your ear to the wall, you can hear the pipes sigh, the glasses in the cupboard buzz, the stairs respond when the first foot is placed on them. I also learned that a home can hold its breath. Ours did for a long time before I realized why. My name is Jonas. I bake bread that crunches like snow when you break it, and I make a living by getting up long before the city. My wife is Line, a graphic designer with hands that always smelled of cardboard and citrus. We met when I was delivering cardamom twists to her office. She took a bite, closed her eyes, and said it tasted like the beginning. I believed her. We moved into a yellow house with a small front yard and an overly large window facing west, where the evening sun bathed us in honey. Many nights she stood behind me, put her chin on my shoulder, and read my recipes aloud as if they were poetry. Some nights I woke up to her foot seeking mine under the covers, that small, blind gesture that felt like the invention of civilization. The first sign was not dramatic, it was an acknowledgement in my email. Thanks for visiting the wine room wall. We hadn't been there in years, not since that summer when we danced too long and laughed because the rain came the right way. The amount was nice. The time was late. I hit forward to send it to Line's email with a joke about inflation. I didn't hit send. Something in me, the old animal part, calmly said, don't. More little things came. A scent she didn't use to wear, green notes, something wet, something warm. A new habit of leaving her phone on silent in the middle of the table like a sleeping animal no one can touch. A mistake where she said we about someone I didn't know and corrected it to I too quickly. And the silence. Not silence. Line has never been silent, but that tense, careful space between sentences where you can hear furniture being rearranged in your head. I'm not a detective, I'm a baker. But my hands are fast learners and my eyes have practiced reading little signs. The yeast's mood, a dough that needs water, crusts that will open now. One day when she was in the shower, her screen flashed. No name, just a heart emoji followed by a single word, the time. I could have picked up the phone, I didn't. Instead, I opened the window and let the cool air sweep my impulse into the yard. That night, I dreamt that our house was on stilts in a lake and I had to choose between saving photo albums or forks. I woke up with the metallic taste of water in my mouth. Line started going to late meetings. She came home with red cheeks and sore lips as if she had been in the wind a lot. When she kissed me, she was warm and present as she had always been. That was almost the worst part. Putrefaction is easier to survive if it's cold. One night she came home earlier than promised, took her shoes off in the hallway and stood in the dark for a long time. I don't like that your shoes don't point the same way, she said suddenly and started to straighten them. She had never done that before. I stood in the kitchen with my hands in the sink thinking, who straightens your shoes? I told my friend Adam, who has the kind of face that is built to listen. He suggested everything that sounds right, talk openly, don't accuse, describe. I decided to ask Line out, not a big evening with white tablecloths, just barefoot on the beach after closing time at the bakery with 2 paper cups of wine and the old blanket that always smells of smoke. She came in her dark coat, her hair in a loose knot. The evening was blue, the sea flat as a thought you dare not say aloud. We drank, we talked. When she leaned into me and slipped her hand under my sweater, her skin was warm and eager. We made love slowly there on the blanket, hidden in the shadow of a boat, and I let myself fall into it like a well where you know you won't find water. Her breath broke, my fingers traced paths I knew by heart. She turned her face to mine and let her lip rest for a long, stubborn moment against mine. I wanted to believe it in response. As we walked home, she held my hand, and I felt old certainty and new guilt walking side by side. I decided to do something that had my scent. Every Friday I do the night baking myself. I mixed a dough that required time, cold rise, slow strength, and I wrote Line's name on my arm with flour dust, an idiotic, private gesture. At 1 o'clock in the morning as the oven sang, a text came. Thanks for today, I can still taste you. I put the phone down like something warm, clutched in my bare hands. When I got home after sunrise, Line was sleeping with her back turned. I sat on the edge of the bed and let my fingers rest in the curve of her neck. She woke up half-turned and let me slip in between the sheets. That morning, she was the one who was hungry. She straddled me, set the pace, and it was nice in that way you missed. But it was as if she met me through a different window, as if I was loved because my shape fit an emptiness I no longer knew. I found a key in the pocket of her coat. Not ours, a small brass tag with a number and an engraved L. On the key ring was a small ceramic bird. I turned it between my fingers while I waited for her to come out of the bathroom. When she came, I handed it to her. You dropped this. Oh, she said, dropping her shoulder a millimeter. It's for the studio, L for stock. It could be true. Warehouse can hold anything, even bodies. I could have chosen to live in atoms, counting hours, smells, receipts. I chose to build something. In a corner of the bakery's back room was an old, almost written-off espresso machine that I had been promising our young barista for weeks to fix. I took it home with me. All Sunday I wrenched and polished until the brass began to glow like stories. When I put it back in the shop on Monday, the coffee suddenly tasted of us. Line came by at lunchtime. She stood with the cup in her hands and smiled in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. "It tastes like finding something again," she said. "What did you find?" I asked. "That I still have a mouth," she said. I could have kissed her over the counter. Instead, that afternoon I wrote to a seaside hotel on the north side and booked a room from her key would fit. I withdrew the money to buy myself the right to be the one to go in. The hotel was behind a row of pine trees that smelled of resin and childhood. It was white and quiet, the kind of quiet created by thick doors and soft carpeting. I walked up the stairs, found the door, let the key click. The room wasn't like in the movies. It was neat, almost boring, but in the sink was a hair that wasn't lines, too dark. On the chair was a scarf, light gray with a small braided edge. It wasn't expensive, but it was well worn. On the desk was a leaflet for an art exhibition, ceramics, see hands, a handwritten note like a bookmark, borrowing your shoulders to breathe. The handwriting was vivid, slanted, definite curves. I sat down on the bed, looked at the edge where someone else had sat, picked up the folder, let my thumbs glide over the paper. Then I put it back down and thought I was going to puke. I didn't. Instead, I walked out onto the balcony, licked salt off my lip from the wind, and said aloud to the air, "This is my worst room and I'm leaving it on my feet." I didn't tell anyone yet. That night I made clam sauce with sage and butter just for two with white wine and lemon. Line came home late and I kept the food warm without complaining. She sat down, sliding her hand along my upper arm. "You smell of something I would think is spring," she said. We ate almost in silence. Then she pulled me into the living room, turned off all the lights except the one by the bookcase, and we lay down. Her body was a map I knew better than anyone else, and yet I sensed paths she had recently abandoned. They didn't make me jealous, they made me polite. I reached out, but I held back when her breathing told me to. When I penetrated her, she held her breath and looked into my eyes for a long time, the way you look at the ocean before you dive in. When she came, she said my name twice. There was a little hard tone in it that I didn't recognize, and I kissed her forehead. Afterwards, as she lay with her heel against my calf, I whispered, "Am I still home?" She ran her fingers through my chest hair and said, "Where else would you be?" I realized who she was. Not Line, I knew her, but the other one. Her name is Carla. I found out by saying the word ceramics out loud in several places carelessly enough. The town is small. A name found me. I walked into her studio on a Tuesday when the sky was wet as wool just to buy a cup. It was a room with a warm floor and windows where the light came in low. Things that had fallen, dried, burned, lived. Carla stood in the background, hair under a scarf, silver ring on her thumb. She looked at me with the kind of look that doesn't jump but stands. "You can walk around," she said, and returned to her turntable. I looked at cups that had small flaws. I chose one that was asymmetrical in a way that felt human. When I paid, she held my hand a second too long, not as flirting but as confirmation. "Yes, I see what you see." I didn't say who I was. We weren't acting. She wrapped the cup in paper, lifted it with two hands, and gave it to me like you give something you've been holding for a long time. The confrontation didn't turn into an act. It became a dinner. I set the table for two and put the living room in warm light. I placed the leaning cup in the middle of the table like an anchor. Line sat down, lifted the cup, smiled, said it felt like a palm. "Her name is Carla," I said. The cup was still between her fingers, but I saw the movement that ran through her shoulders, the little sea walk. She put the cup down. "Yes," she said. Her voice was calm, not defiant. "Grief does not rhyme with drama." "How long?" I asked. "Long enough that I thought I could do without saying it," she said. "It was a mistake, not her, my faith." She told me without embellishment. They had met at an exhibition, talked at length about hands that work, about materials that speak out. A coffee turned into wine, a wine into two. The first touch was not a kiss, it was, she said, a hand on the back of the neck after a hard day, a gesture that demanded nothing and gave everything. "I felt light," she said. "I felt like a direction." I nodded. "I'm a baker, I know all about yeast finally getting air." "What do you feel now?" I asked. "Shame," she said, and the word fell with the sound of an old graveyard. "Shame, not as a whip but as a stone. And love," she looked at me, "for you too, in a way that hasn't been alive for a long time, and to her, in a way that taught me how to breathe." "This isn't going to be either or," I said. "It's going to be called true or not." She nodded. "I know." We agreed to a break. Not relief, not a temporary break from being adults. A pause in movement so we could see what was ours when everything that kept us going stopped. Line moved into her sister's apartment for a few weeks. I moved into the kitchen in a different way. I put the knives down slowly. I let the bread sing longer in the oven. I spoke quietly to my doughs that I had never had time for. In the evening I sat on the floor in front of the window and drank tea from the crooked cup. I learned that tea doesn't just taste of leaves and water, it tastes of vessels and the hand that holds it. Carla wrote to me, not a long letter, just a handful of sentences that you could balance on a middle finger. I will not take anything, not even what is not mine to take. I will say out loud that I am. If you want another cup, I made one thinking of you. I didn't answer. I walked past the workshop the next day and saw the cup in the window. It was lower, wider, a cup for someone who drinks slowly. I went inside. It's not free, she said. I can't become a story that's in debt. Good, I said, putting money on the counter. What do I owe for truth? We all pay for truth on an ongoing basis, she said. Line and I saw each other. Some evenings we walked along the river and talked about practical things, finances, house, what we say to friends. Other evenings we sat on the bench under the west-facing window and said things that wouldn't bear repeating. One night she put her hand on the back of my neck, exactly where it always feels like home. Can I kiss you? She asked. Yes, I said, and she didn't kiss with apology. She kissed like someone who knows the difference between desire and escape. We went to bed, and that night we were slow in a new way. She rolled up my t-shirt, put her mouth on my stomach lightly like you put a cup. As I slid into her, she turned her head and let her hair fall so I had to move it to see her face. She held my wrist as if my pulse was what she needed most. We fell asleep intricately and without promises, but with something resembling an answer. I invited Carla to the bakery after hours. It sounds like the beginning of a different kind of story. It wasn't. I had a microphone on the counter and a turned-off oven that still smelled of heat. What do you want me to be? She asked. True, I said, and short, she laughed. I'm a potter, we can't be short. She spoke the way you turn a bowl, steadily, evenly, without shock. She had been in relationships that were simpler. Then she met Line, and for the first time she didn't feel the need to explain her own way of being. I didn't take anything from you on purpose, she said, but I gave her something she didn't ask me to hold back. It's not your job to hold back, I said. It's ours. She nodded. What do you want me to do? Let's not hide, I said. If you and Line see each other, it should be in daylight, not in rooms where the carpets swallow crotches. I can live in light, she said. Can you? We tried. It was awkward at first. Friends are used to two-seat tables, not three. My mom asked questions that no one can answer elegantly. My dad didn't say much. He asked if he could come and get bread with salty butter in the yard, and as we sat there, he said he loved me even when I wasn't easy. Line looked at me like someone who has been allowed to go barefoot after too much leather. Carla sometimes came by the bakery with clay under her nails and put a bag with 3 small bowls on the counter. For salt, for olives, for leftovers, she said, winking. There were evenings when I felt jealousy like a cold hand on my chest. That night I went to the workshop and slammed 2 failed baguettes into the table, heard their hollow thud, laughed because even bread speaks the truth when it doesn't want to. There came a day when I suggested something I never thought I would suggest. Why don't we let the house do the talking? Line looked at me with a frown. Carla stood in the kitchen, washing her hands long and carefully as she always does. What does that mean? Line asked. That we no longer hide from the light in our own rooms, I said. That if you want to lay your head on her shoulder on our couch, you do it. That if I want to put my hand on your ankle, I will. That everything we do must be able to withstand our window. They nodded uncertainly but with a strange sense of relief. That night the 3 of us lay on the floor with pillows, touching each other in ways that were not ownership but presence. Carla braided Line's hair. I massaged the root of Carla's hand because I know what work does to hands. Line lay between us, breathing deeply like someone finally sleeping without knives in the air. When we went to bed, we were 2 again, and I didn't promise anything I couldn't keep. I promised to be where I was. Some would say that revenge is what's missing. There was a time when I dreamed of inviting half the town to the wine bar and reading messages aloud. I didn't do it. My revenge became something else. I put closed for today on the bakery door and wrote underneath, opening tomorrow with slow bread. People came in the next day and asked what slow bread was. I replied that it was bread that had been allowed, that we don't tear the crusts off each other in the dark but break in daylight. I sold out. One fall evening when the rain was falling like pearls on the windowpane and the world was dense, Line came home soaking wet and without a coat. She stood in the hallway shivering like an animal. I wrapped a towel around her and she laid her head against my chest. I've said goodbye to Carla, she said, not because I don't love her, because I can't love too without something in me dying. I held her tightly, my body both relieved and in grief. What do you want? I asked. To be in a house where we breathe, she said. Carla came the next day and put a box on our table, cups, a bowl, a small vase. For what I borrowed, she said. She kissed Line on the forehead, me on the cheek, and she left without drama. We all cried, but no one sobbed. It was more like rain finally being allowed to fall. That sounds like an ending. It wasn't an ending. It was a next beginning, the way beginnings look when you've lived long enough to know your own shadow. Line and I learned to kiss again, not as an excuse, not as proof, but as language. She sat on the kitchen table in an old-fashioned t-shirt and pulled me in between her knees. I let my cheek glow against hers, and our mouths found the rhythm we always knew, only slower. When we made love, it wasn't to cover anything up. It was to see. I counted her birthmarks, she counted my scars. We were not flawless, we were present. One night she sat on me, put her hands on my face, and held my gaze while her body wrote its own paragraph. It wasn't spectacular, it was real. Some nights we would still wake up and hear the house holding its breath. Then we would go down to the living room, sit on the floor, and drink tea from the lopsided cup we now shared. We talked about little things, a customer who had paid in coins, a color complaint that ended happily. We said "I'm here" even when we were tired. We left the window slightly open to remind space and skin that air exists. If you ask me what I learned, I would say, that truth cannot be squeezed into one night, one speech, one admission. It has to be baked, it must be kneaded with hands that have washed clay and hands that smell of yeast. It must rise while you sleep, and you must dare to open the door even if it collapses. Revenge is rarely nourishing. Presence is. And eroticism, it carries truth best when it's not disguised as salvation, but as desire that wants to be seen. One day Carla came by again, not to stay, but to return a repaired vase we had dropped in the kitchen. She stood in the doorway with puffy cheeks and said she had met someone who loved her hands as they were. We drank coffee. Line and Carla hugged long and quietly like sisters who don't need everything. When Carla left, we stood in the window and waved. She turned and put her hand to her chest, and I did the same, out of pure reflex. It's late now, I have to get up soon and turn on the oven. Line is half asleep on my pillow, her hair lying like a dark river on the sheet. The house is breathing again, deep and calm, with the little cracks in the walls that I love. I reach out and let my fingertips graze the crooked cup on the bedside table, proof that things can carry more than their shape promises if someone puts them down gently. I fall asleep thinking that our window is no longer something I fear, it's something I turn on. And when morning comes and I put the bread in, I hear the crust crack in the heat of the oven, the little song that says, now we open.